Hola, local Liberty fans. Welcome back. It's time for another community chat segment. This is where we give you the chance to voice your views, to talk about issues you are interested in. Today, we're joined by Roger Benham. He was recently in Greece helping with the refugee crisis. Roger, it's a pleasure to have you. Why don't you tell people, what did you do in Greece?
Thanks, Shane. Thanks for having me. Well, for the month of February, myself and my wife and three friends of ours from the United States went and we worked with some people doing volunteer work on the island of Lesvos, or Lesbos, it can be pronounced either way, just off the Turkish coast. Now that's a Greek island. It's the biggest of the islands that refugees from the Middle East have been arriving at. So we were meeting boats on the beaches, and we were transporting people, doing medical assessments and helping them to get further care. Mostly people coming from Syria, also from Iraq, Afghanistan, other places in North Africa and the Middle East. And we were there right up through the end of this big refugee flow. Things kind of changed right after we left. We'll probably talk about that a little bit.
What was your day-to-day like there? Say, give me a timeline. You wake up in the morning, what are you doing?
Well, we arrived there on February 3rd, I believe it was, and we were in a very rural area on the northeastern point of Lesvos. There are rural farm roads there, but then people would often land maybe like 15 kilometers, 12 miles away from the main road. So what we would do is we would camp at these beaches or these sites where a lot of boats had been coming in. And sometimes people would come right to these beaches. Other times people would walk out and say, look, I've left 25 or 30 vulnerable people, older people, families back where our boat landed last night. And then we'd drive through the roads and we'd try to meet them and pick them up. The group that I worked with was just made up of volunteers, and it was a kind of a solidarity or charity-based organization that was spontaneously formed in response to the crisis at the end of last summer, mostly composed of people from across the European Union, people from the UK, Italy, Spain, Germany. We were some of the first Americans to arrive. There had been one American who was working there before, but when the five of us showed up, we almost doubled the size of their team. So when we showed up at the beginning of February, we were allowed to camp on a lot more of these sites. So that's what our day would look like. During the night, we would camp. We would sleep in shifts. When we heard of a boat or when we got a call on our phones, on our WhatsApp, we would go and respond. So oftentimes we were up for most of the night, and then we would sleep during the day. Or there would be nights or days when no boats arrived because of the bad weather. And during that time, we would do things like beach cleanup. The beaches there are littered with life jackets and with wrecked boats from refugees coming. So we would smash up the boats and then haul them away or gather the garbage. Do other things like trying to improve staircases from the cliffs where people would land, and other things to just make the whole area cleaner and safer for refugees to land.
What was the official response to the Greek government? I mean, was this sanctioned? Was this considered legal? What were you doing? What was that? Was there a gray area there?
Yeah, it was completely legal what we were doing at the time. There were a lot of rumors that were flying around saying that you would have to register with the Greek government. None of that happened while we were there. It didn't happen until we left. But things changed severely as soon as we left. But while we were there, this was part of a whole almost spontaneous response, but just by citizens from across the European Union when the refugees started to really come to the Greek islands heavily last year in 2015. People were drowning. People were coming in these dinghies that oftentimes would just burst when they hit a rock. The smugglers would not often go on the boats with them, but just send people to pilot themselves across the straits from Turkey. So you were seeing a lot of people drowning.
Can you explain that a little further? Because you talked about that at your recent presentation you gave for the Mill Museum, where these people were abandoned mid crossing over of the ocean, and they'd be abandoned by the actual people controlling the boats.
Sure. Well, you remember where we were, you could see the Turkish coastline. So like I say, it was about 12 kilometers, more or less 8 miles between Turkey and Greece. So not very far as the crow or the helicopter flies, but obviously with ocean currents, this is a straight part of the Aegean Sea, part of the ocean, and weather. It's very hazardous in a small open boat. Now, most of the boats that we saw were dinghies that probably could safely carry about 10 people, 20 people, short distances, and sometimes these would be crammed with 45 people or more. And sometimes they were larger boats, depending on how much you could pay. But typically, people would pay about 1,000 euros, and then that would be for each member of their family. And then they'd hide in a forest on the Turkish side. And then when the smugglers said it was okay, they'd pile into one of these dinghies with an outboard motor. And then when they got a little ways out to sea, out into the strait, a jet ski would show up and take off the smuggler pilot. And then the people on the boat would be left but for themselves, and the smugglers would just say, see those lights, those dim lights up there? That's Greece that way, go. And this is usually at night. And then people who often didn't have any experience with boats, who might have grown up in cities like Damascus or Baghdad, in the middle of the desert, in the middle of landlocked areas, were trying to pilot these boats across this open water. And wearing fake life jackets, because they were forced to buy life jackets before they would get on these boats. And these life jackets either were stuffed with non-buoyant materials, or else they were the kind of life flotation devices that you wear when you're recreationally jet skiing or water skiing, and they're designed to keep you up in the water for a minute or two. But if you go down in a boat with one of these life jackets, it becomes waterlogged very quickly and it drags you down. And that's another reason why people were drowning. So this volunteer response was directly addressed to have volunteer rescue boats that were going out to rescue people in the water, and those were done by lifeguards and firefighters who were coming from across Europe on their own time, raising their own money, organizing their own response boats. But then also people to meet these boats once they got to the coast, to treat people for hypothermia, to feed them, to deal with sick children or injuries that people might have incurred on the crossing.
What was your reaction when you got there on the ground and you saw your first refugees, and after you spent a few days there, what did you think to yourself about this whole situation, this whole quote-unquote refugee crisis? I mean, was this worse, better? I mean, what were your reactions just as a human being, seeing other people floating in?
Well, I will say this, having done some work like this before, both in politically caused disasters or in natural disasters, usually things look... When you're looking at something from far away, you're seeing the media representation. So, that saying, if it bleeds, it leads.
Yes.
So it's really easy to think that what's going on in these situations is crisis, 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 and it's just trauma, trauma, trauma. But obviously what you're seeing from far away is that one bad thing that happened at that place that day. So in between, there are a lot of just boredom or just dealing with very mundane things, everything that you could consider that would be a problem if your whole family has lost everything except what they can put into backpacks. And imagine you have a father, a mother, you might have grandma, grandpa along with you, and you have 2 or 3 or sometimes 4 small children or babies, and then you've got perhaps an older sibling, and everybody is carrying in their backpacks all of their possessions. They're carrying any little bit of schoolwork, they're carrying cold weather clothing, or perhaps you're carrying one good dress, your daughter's one good dress, or you're carrying your interview suit, your tie, all crammed into this thing, and you have lugged it all the way from Iraq or from Syria or from Afghanistan. And oftentimes people would leave that stuff on the coast once it got completely soaked. So you were dealing with people who were going through this long trauma. But at the same time, they were getting to Europe. So when we saw them, it was the happiest day of their life for a long time when they hit the beach and they got off that boat.
It'd be similar like maybe someone fleeing from Cuba.
Yes.
Like the reaction, it's like, I'm finally here. It was an arduous journey, but it's worth it now. What was the European response? Like, while you're in Greece, what is Greece as a government doing? I mean, they're in a chaotic situation right now. How are they responding to the refugees?
Yeah, Greece is, since 2008, they have been in a financial depression. So they have 25% unemployment. They have high levels of debt that the rest of the European Union, led by Germany, is demanding that they repay, which means that their taxes are through the roof. People's homes have been foreclosed upon. People have lost all of their life savings and their pensions. But the Greek people in general, well, they're divided on the issue, like you would expect people to be anywhere. There are right-wing parties in Greece. There's a fascist party, the Golden Dawn. Young members of the Golden Dawn go out and beat up immigrants, and in some cases have murdered them. They go out and they beat up gay people too, and anarchists and other people they don't agree with. But from my experience, the majority of the Greek population did the best they could to help refugees. The island where we were, Lesvos, it's important to remember that a lot of the families there were refugees themselves less than 100 years ago. In 1921, their families were forced out of Turkey, ethnic Greek people, and at the same time, Muslim Greeks were forced to go to Turkey. There was a big population exchange. And a lot of these people actually remember it. There were like people in their 80s will remember the stories that their mothers told. So before people started arriving from the rest of Europe, people in these small villages that are depressed with very little opportunity, mostly agricultural jobs, but with a lot of pressures from taxation and trying to repay this debt, they went out of their way to feed and clothe refugees that were walking up from the shore. And when volunteers came in, we often worked alongside local people. The village that we were in, Clio, there was a refugee reception center that had been set up before anyone else arrived by some local women, some of these older women who remembered what their mothers and their grandmothers and their grandfathers told them about having to flee from Turkey in 21 with nothing but the clothes on their backs. They had set up a refugee reception center, and then a very small NGO bringing people from Luxembourg and Germany and other places had come in and worked alongside them in this old cheese factory to set up a reception center, a place where refugees just getting off the boat and being brought up in pickup trucks could get hot tea, they could get dry clothes, they could use the bathroom, they could get initial medical attention, then they could wait there for buses that would bring them further along to a Doctors Without Borders transfer hospital. So a lot of the folks that I met and talked with who were Greek were very sympathetic to the plight of the refugees. At the same time, they realized that Greece couldn't be dealing with this problem alone. And that's what's happened since March 15th, or I'm sorry, when we were there, they started to close the border between Greece and Macedonia. And that was the way that refugees were passing through Greece to the rest of Europe. That border was closed in February while we were there to everyone except Syrians. So people coming from all of these other conflict zones, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Somalia, Iraq, were suddenly not allowed to cross that border, and they were effectively trapped in Greece. Since then, they've closed it to everyone, including Syrians. So there's upwards of 50,000 refugees who are trapped in Greece right now, and Greece does not have the resources to feed, clothe, or help them, let alone long-term educate or resettle them and help them get on with their lives.
So prior to this border closing, there was what I think is an arbitrary distinction made between refugees. You're not worth it, you are. But now that they don't even have that, no one can cross. What is the European response to this? What are other countries doing? What are these people, how are they going to get help now?
Well, it's very controversial because on March 15, let me back up just a minute. Right before we left at the beginning of February, we were not sure we were going to be able to do any work on Lesvos at all because they were talking about shutting down that migration route. So just before we left, a Greek minister had said that somebody from the EU, specifically from the Belgian government, had said, you know, in Greece, you need to control this border. You need to stop people from passing in here. And this Greek minister had said, you can't stop people from a maritime border. If you're pushing people back from a maritime border, you're drowning them. So imagine as people are coming ashore in a boat, if you're not allowed to land, they're going to drown.
Right.
So you can't, it's not like a land border where you can just set up a wall and say turn around and go back. So Greece is the frontier of Europe. So Greece was told you have to control this frontier because once you're in Greece, you're in Europe, and then you had the right to go to other places in the EU. So on March 15, a deal was struck between the European Union and Turkey, and Greece assented to it, that said that anyone else who arrives illegally in Greece, beginning on March 15th, will be returned to Turkey. Anyone arriving from Turkey by this boat route will be returned. And in exchange, the Turks are going to be given some money from the European Union to make the lot of refugees in Turkey better. Then people who are from Syria, from that one country, can apply in Turkey to try to enter the European Union. And for every Syrian who's sent back from Greece to Turkey, the European Union will agree to take a Syrian from a Turkish refugee camp. So in effect, they're trading human lives for money, and you could perceive this, and a lot of people do, activists, lawyers, and other human rights groups, as trafficking in human lives. It hasn't been challenged yet, but I think that there's a good probability that it will be challenged, and I firmly believe, and I mentioned this in a talk at the museum, that this is a violation of the 1951 Treaty on the Rights of the Refugees, on the Rights of the Refugee, which was a treaty signed by the Western Allies after World War II to ensure that what happened during World War II never happened again, where people were forced out of their countries, or they were returned to countries that were in conflict where they subsequently ended up being persecuted or being killed. And that's really what's happening. Turkey has returned some people to Syria and to Afghanistan and to other conflict zones. Amnesty International has documented several cases of this happening. Turkey itself is fighting a war against its own Kurdish population. A lot of the refugees that I met and worked with were Kurds fleeing from Iraq and Syria. Turkey itself has declared Kurdish nationalist organizations to be terrorist organizations. I met one man who had fought in the Kurdish militia, which the Turks believe to be declared to be a terrorist organization. So if someone like that is returned to Turkey and it's found out that they were fighting in that organization, and he was fighting ISIS, by the way, fighting in Syria against ISIS, not fighting the Turkish government, although the Kurds want their own country, with a large part of them living in Turkey. So the idea that Turkey is a safe haven and a safe place for refugees to be returned to, I just don't think that holds up at all. And the other thing is that when you're a refugee in Turkey, there's all these restrictions on what you can do. You can't work. You can't go to school. It's in effect your whole life is on hold while you're there.
There's no way to better yourself, as you're saying.
That's right. As a part of this deal, the Turkish government has agreed that Syrians will be allowed to work in a very minimal way. But nobody knows what that looks like, and that doesn't address the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of other people that can't prove that they're from the nation of Syria, who nevertheless are fleeing legitimate conflict zones in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Somalia.
You brought up the hot topic word earlier, terrorism. A lot of people in the United States condemn many of the refugees, saying there's a lot of terrorism going on. All these people are trying to secretly get into places in Europe, to get into the United States, to commit acts of violence against us. What do you think about those claims? I mean, what about that? A large number of these people are men of fighting age. How do you address those claims?
Well, I think to address all of those that you just brought up, Shane, would take far longer than the show. But I'll try to hit them as much as I can. First of all, the idea that any of these folks would come to the United States, my understanding of the way that we process refugees into the United States, not into Europe,
right,
is that's impossible. In order to become a refugee and admitted to the United States, my understanding of the process now, and this has been explained to me by people that work with refugee resettlement in the state of Connecticut, is you have to apply. And you have to apply from a refugee camp in Jordan or Turkey. And it's about a 2-year process. And during that process, you have to prove you are who you say you are. You have to provide all of this documentation for yourself and the rest of your family. So it's very difficult to get admitted to the United States as a refugee to the United States. Getting into Europe, of course, is much easier. And that's the people that we were working with. You just crossed these straits until recently, and you were there in Europe, and then you had the right to apply for asylum and for refugee status. Now, the fears that people are talking about is that people in ISIS and would possibly disguise themselves as refugees to sneak into Europe. Now, when you consider that last year 1 million refugees or more entered Europe, and that so far there doesn't seem to be any evidence that a single one of them, as a refugee, has committed an act of terror. The acts of terror that have been committed in Paris and Belgium, in Brussels, have been centered upon a specific ISIS cell in Belgium. And yes, those people did go and fight with ISIS in Syria. But to my understanding, all of them were EU citizens. In other words, they held Belgian or French passports before they went to Syria. They were not refugees. They were Europeans, disaffected young Europeans who became radicalized at home in Belgium and France, and then they went to Syria. There have been no cases so far that I know of people who were from Syria or Iraq and passed themselves off as refugees to infiltrate Europe, let alone the United States, to commit acts of terror.
It's specifically the United States. We talked about this in another episode of Local Liberty. There are many easier ways for a terrorist to get into this country. They could go to Mexico and cross the border there. They could apply for student visas. The refugee process, because I also looked into it myself, it is vigorous and rigorous. It is difficult to get through to actually complete the process of getting your refugee status. There are other ways that terrorists could go about doing it. They'll just be more effective and easier. So I think it's an overblown case about there's terrorism. They're bringing all the terrorists here. I think this is kind of a scare tactic to get us to dislike the refugees, to get this go away. We don't want these people here, and they're ignoring the plight of the people on the ground, because these people, they're the ones affected by ISIS on the ground. They're fleeing from ISIS, right? So what do you think about the human cost, the human toil? Like, what do you think is the moral obligation for people to do regarding these refugees?
Well, you want to just think about Syria. So far, since this war has started in 2016. So it's been 5 years. Is that right? So it's been 5 years since the war started. There have been at least 250 to 300,000 people killed in Syria. Most of a significant proportion of the population has been displaced, and that's why there are over 3 million refugees in those countries roundabout. Now, the Syrian civil war started when Assad's government crushed peaceful protests, but it was not. It is not fueled just from Syria. The Syrian civil war is an outgrowth of the larger things that have been going on in the region, and it's my belief they can be traced back to U.S. policy, to Western European policy, to Russian policy, to policies of countries, including ourselves, that are outside of that region. So these are the people that are paying the price. And you know, the Syrian ISIS itself doesn't produce munitions. It doesn't make AK-47s. It doesn't make rocket-propelled grenades. It certainly doesn't make PT-76s and T-72s and the other tanks that you see them using. So those weapons and that money is getting into that region of Syria and Iraq from outside. So the Syrian civil war is a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and its clients in the Gulf and Iran and the Assad government. And Russia has become, of course, involved, and so have we through our proxies, the Saudis. And now we're directly militarily involved in fighting ISIS. So these people are fleeing basically from munitions that are manufactured in the United States, in Germany, in France, in Russia, in China, in Iran, or bought with American money by Saudi Arabia and Qatar and then shipped into the region. So I feel that we have a moral responsibility to accept civilians, non-combatants, who are fleeing from that situation. Also, a lot of these people are coming from Iraq and Afghanistan, like I mentioned, and they are fleeing the wars that were started for whatever reason you think, you know, if we should have invaded Iraq in 2003 or we shouldn't have. I happen to believe that that was a colossal mistake and it was a war of choice. But even if you believe that we were honestly deceived about the weapons of mass destruction, and we made an honest mistake, we still owe it to the people, the civilians that are fleeing that destroyed society. Also, some of the people that I met, you mentioned this idea that keeps coming up that there's a lot of young men that are fleeing that should be standing their ground and fighting ISIS or fighting the Assad government. I just want to challenge that so much. On Lesvos, we were meeting families. The vast majority of people we were meeting were part of a family unit. And the numbers that broke down, according to the United Nations High Commissioner of Refugees, for the month of February, because everyone on Lesvos, after they went through our process and we brought them to Doctors Without Borders, they went and registered with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. So they had a registration of what everybody's gender and age was. 60% of the people coming to Lesvos in the month of February were either women or they were young children. So you had 40% that were men over the age of 16. I think 16 is considered to be fighting age. So men between the age of 16 and death. So 40%, 60%. This is about what you would expect to see if there was a split, if any community here had to hit the roads. So
just to make that clear, that other 40%, it's just men over 16.
It's either 16 or 17. I don't know what military age is defined as. It might be 14, but it's all men. It's all boys and men above that
because
age.
There's a cutoff, because men of fighting age, if you're 65 years old, that's not a man of fighting age at that point.
Yes. They didn't break out men of fighting age. They just said 60% were women and children. I'm not sure where the child cutoff is, but I'm pretty sure it was 14 or 16 for boys. And then, like I mentioned, this one man I met, a Kurdish fighter who had fought and liberated the city Kobane from ISIS with the aid of U.S. airstrikes. We're fighting on their side when we're fighting the Kurds. But then when the Turks attack them with our F-16s, suddenly, they're getting pounded from the other side. And that's why he left. Well, that's one reason. But he had fought for 2 years, and he said that when he would kill people from ISIS, he would sometimes find in their papers that they were European. Or he claimed that he found American passports. And he was saying, how can you let these ISIS fighters come fight us? And of course, those people are coming over the border from Turkey because it's been to Turkey's advantage to prop up ISIS. So I'd just say that anybody who believes that these are cowards, that men who are young in their 20s are cowards for fleeing and not fighting, I think that's ridiculous. A lot of them have been fighting, a lot of them have been wounded, and a lot of them are now fleeing together with their elderly parents, or with their very young children, or with their siblings, or perhaps they're completely disillusioned, or they don't see any good way to fight. They don't see any side to fight on where they won't be directly involved in the killing of civilians, or perhaps a genocide of neighboring neighborhoods. Also, a lot of people that we got in February on Lesvos were Yazidis. You know, they're a religious minority from northern Iraq. There were several nights when we were getting a lot of folks from that area. The Yazidis are not Muslims, they're not Christians, they're not Jews. They consider themselves to be part of the Abrahamic tradition, but
they're not peoples of the book according to
harsh Muslims. But they believe they're pagans. So this means that when they're captured, ISIS has said they can be enslaved. So Yazidi women have been put into sexual slavery. So these are people fleeing that. So, you know, some of these people do stand up and fight. You can find images on the internet of Yazidi women organized into militias and fighting, but you can't expect every single person to be able to fight. And families should not be fighting. So you're going to have these refugee flows. And this whole idea that people are cowards and fleeing, to me, it really sounds a lot like victim blaming. And we would condemn this. Most of us would condemn this when it's said about people in World War II. And when we say, why didn't people in the camps fight? Why didn't the Jews fight? Why did they go into the cattle cars and go to the camps? That is justly and rightly condemned. It is because we do know that in some instances, Jews in Europe in World War II did fight. They fought when they had weapons, like in the Warsaw Ghetto, and they fought when they had effective military leadership. But if you're just a civilian and you don't have any military experience, and you're concerned about your family,
it's classic victim blaming. It's like blaming the rape victim.
Yeah,
you know, it's ridiculous. Roger, we're starting to run out of time. Is there anything else you would like to say in summary? And is there any information you'd like to give out about people who can go to websites so they can find out more information?
Yes. So, as I said, everything has changed since March 15th. And what I would really like to do is I would like to see Americans pushing to change U.S. policy so that we will accept more refugees. Because we have only committed to accepting 10,000 refugees in the coming year. And I really think that we should be looking more to accept 100,000 at least in the coming year. Germany has accepted 1 million last year. So I would encourage people to look into that. There's the Quiet Corner Refugee Resettlement group that represents about 30 faith-based groups in our corner of Connecticut, and they are trying to directly resettle refugees. People can check out IRIS, which is in New Haven. That's IRIS. It's a long-standing Episcopal associated charity that does refugee resettlement in Connecticut. You can Google that. If people want to find out what this group that I worked with, Coordination Caracas team, CK team on the island of Lesvos around Caracas Point is doing, they have a public Facebook page, CK Team Lesvos. That's LESVOS, refugees, CK Team Lesvos refugees. They post updates about what they're doing there. They're still working on Lesvos, but they're also working on mainland Greece with some of these 50,000 refugees that are stuck in Greece now. Stuck in Greece, with nobody knows what's exactly is going to happen with them. That's what I would say for people to do, but also just educate yourself about what's going on with the war in Syria and the ongoing wars in Iraq, and beyond that, in the region, in Afghanistan, Somalia, Libya. We're seeing already in this past week, now that they've shut down the Greek route, more and more people crossing, as people did before, from North Africa to Italy. And a ship just yesterday went down off the coast of Egypt when 400 people are reported drowned. Because that sea crossing is not 8 miles like it is between Lesvos and Turkey. That sea crossing is over 300 miles on the open Mediterranean Sea. And that's exactly what was predicted by a lot of people. They said if you shut down this Greek route, people are just going to try to cross the open Mediterranean like they did before the Greek route opened. And just yesterday, we saw 400 people killed. People initially rejected that report because it was the exact 1-year anniversary, April 18th, 2015, that 400 people were killed off the Libyan coast in the Mediterranean. So when that report first came out, people were saying this is a mistake, it's last year's report. No, it's happening again. So that's one of the worst maritime disasters you can imagine. 400 people killed. Just last year we had 400 people killed. So we really need to address this. And I just want to say in closing, what's happening now with the border of Greece, between Greece and Macedonia being closed, Austria is also talking about doing that with its border with Italy. And if this goes on, you're going to start to see France talking about doing this with its border with Spain. People are going to continue to cross the sea to Spain, to Italy, to Greece, to these other areas of Europe that have oceans, that have Mediterranean sea frontage, because that, like that Greek minister said, you cannot turn back people in a sinking boat. So if we don't address this, and people in those countries are going to start to see their freedom of movement restricted to Northern Europe. And once you start doing that, you start to tear at the whole European project and the whole idea of a community of democratic nations.
On Local Liberty, we're going to be talking more about this issue. We always promote public education. Understand about what you're talking about. Don't just read the headlines and jump to conclusions. Anyways, Roger Benham, it's been great having you on the show. Maybe we'll have you back sometime. Remember, this is Community Chat, folks. If you're interested in talking about a topic you want to talk about, write in the comments below. Contact me. I'm always walking around town in Willimantic. Let me know. We want to hear from you. Thank you, Roger, and thank you, Local Liberty fans. Catch you later.